Hi guys, and welcome to part 2 of the final upgrades to my KITT Trans Am. So in this video I'm going to go through the transmission oil and oil filter change, the axle oil change, as well as the change of the track arm bushings and the rear lower control arm bushings. Let's go! I already got the set of oil filter and gasket. It comes with two gaskets, the ACDelco filter. I've been told that it has like a thicker gasket and one thinner one, and you use the thick one if you have a sort of ribbed surface on the transmission, and the other one, the thinner one, if the surface is thin. So we'll see what's on the old oil pan and how it's looking like. I got myself some transmission oil. I'm using Dexron 3 for GM cars, so I got about 6 liters. In terms of the quantity, I think I'll need between around 5 liters. If you empty it completely, probably need a lot more, but since there's always some in the converter, check this here. I have my Haynes repair manual, and the manual states with the fluids 704 with 4.7 quarts, meaning about 4.5 liters of oil. Also, you might notice that I put my car on ramps, not on jack stands, so the rear of the car on the ground, which means that the oil pan here is not level, which is not a problem if you just want to drain it and put the new oil filter in and fill it back up. But in terms of checking the right oil level, I will have to put it down on level surface so I can measure the quantity correctly. So the situation here is that this brace that is holding the supporting the transmission in place is a little bit too much forward, so I can't really reach ratchet here, can't really reach all the bolts properly with the ratchet. So because there is a little bit of give in these brackets, I can basically just lift up the transmission so it's supported, then loosen up all these 5 bolts and push it out slightly back so I can access the transmission oil pan bolts with the ratchet, tighten this back up, take the jack down, take the oil pan down. One other piece of advice: whenever you're taking an oil pan off, taking the bolts off, or a differential cover or anything of that kind, take a piece of cardboard, draw yourself a mock-up of the gasket, the pan holes, the shape, so you can actually put every bolt you take out, you put it in the exact same spot that it came out, so you can put it back in, so the thread matches exactly the place in the gearbox or in the engine that you've taken it out. And also it's a good measure, it's a good way to actually count the bolts. This one has 16 bolts, and I counted the ones on the transmission, and it fits in the same position, so I'm pretty sure that this is actually the right gasket and the right filter for my 700 R4 transmission. It's the next day. I've let it drain for the whole night. There's the drain pan, the old pan with the old filter. Clips in somewhere here in the front. Oh yeah, there it is. O-ring in there. This needs to come out. I'll have to check with the new one. Make sure everything comes out properly and nothing stays in the gearbox. I'm gonna clean out, I'm gonna do this off camera, clean off everything nicely and show you how I clean up all that. See, the oil pan, it really needs to come off properly. And then also I noticed here, I have the dipstick tube has come out slightly. Maybe they've tried to remove it and they've damaged the rubber. Some of the oil came out on top. It looks like there is a leak, but it's actually, I think, just because of the dipstick tube that was not properly sealed. I've cleaned up all the mating surface of the transmission. It's looking pretty good. So there we have the oil pan and the filter. Luckily it looks exactly like the new one I got. Now I just have to scrape off the rest of the gasket bits that are here on the oil pan, and also you can see that the shape, the mating surface is not completely flat, so it has this indentation. Obviously this kit comes with two gaskets, like a cork shaped one and a made one and a paper gasket, and it says here that the package contains two oil pan gaskets. The paper coated gasket is used in figure 1 and the cork gasket is used in figure 2. If you look at figure 1, this is the way the oil pan gasket looks like, and then this is the one for the paper one. The cork one for figure 2. This is figure 2. Mine, however, looks like this is figure 1. Figure 1 would be paper one. So this one. Yeah, so I've put it back on. The paper one for this type of oil pan structure, which is what I have. And then obviously I'm not going to use the cork one. Before you put the new oil filter in with the new, with the pan, make sure to grab out the old gasket here. It's stuck in here. Just fished it out with a knife. This is the old oil filter seal. It's all dry. I attached a new gasket to the old pan with several zip ties, which I now remove gradually as I put the bolts back in a crisscross manner. Now I'm gonna change the seal that goes in between the dipstick tube of the transmission and the transmission itself, because the one that was in originally is torn apart, and then I temporarily fixed it with some gaffer tape, but it's not really, doesn't seal properly. This is the part number from Pioneer. Hang on, let me focus on that. The trick now is to actually turn and twist it and be able to lift it high enough so I can actually take it all the way out and put the new seal in and then push it back down. Looks like I got lucky. I was able to pull and twist and turn it a little bit. The new seal, just gotta put it in place here. You know, I just need to push it all the way back in. On second thoughts, I would recommend to put the seal in first into the gearbox and then glide the tube in. Otherwise it's going to be difficult to really put the seal into the gearbox. Fill in the fresh oil through the transmission dipstick tube. First fill about the same amount of oil as you drained. First of all, start up the car and run it through every single gear slowly. Reverse. Go through all the different gears so that the oil can circulate through all the gears. Back in P, and then measure the oil level while the car is running in P on a flat surface. Only then will you have a proper readout of the transmission oil when the car is running and it's parked in P. While the engine is running, take out the dipstick and measure the oil level. Be careful, it might be very hot. If the transmission oil level is good, like in this case, you're good to go, you can close the hood and you can drive. Before you open up the diff cover, remove the filling plug with a 3/8 square socket. You never know, if it's stuck and you've opened the differential cover first, you won't be able to refill it and move your car, so be smart. Here we can clearly see that the oil level is just below the filling plug, as it should. Free up all of the bolts, then start removing them, but leave the top middle bolt in loosely, so you can pry open the cover without it falling down. I lowered the sway bar and used a large flat metal chisel to gently pry the cover open. Be very careful not to scratch the mating surfaces. For the diff itself, before I scrub off the little bits and pieces of the gasket, of the old gasket, I just put a cloth on it or in it to avoid any debris from scraping off, any debris of the old gasket to get into the diff. So I simply scrape it off, and anything that falls onto the cloth I can just take it out without having to fish it out of the inside of the diff, possibly not even seeing it or finding it. I cleaned the diff cover thoroughly, made sure not to scratch it, and put the new gasket on to check whether it's a proper fit. I didn't use any sealant, just put the gasket in place and made sure to put each bolt back in the same spot I took them out. Once the cover was back on, I filled in 1.65 liters of ACDelco axle oil. It came up to the exact same level the old one was, just under the filling plug line. Depending on whether your car has a limited slip differential, you'd have to add a special additive, so you'll need to refer to your axle specification to find that out. Mine has a standard 10-bolt non-limited slip differential axle and therefore doesn't need that additive. First, I'm putting the car in jack stands and remove the rear wheels to get access to the track arm. Here's another top tip: if you put the jack bar bolt in on the right side, on the passenger side, put it in from behind and not from the front, otherwise you won't be able to take it back out with the spring, with the rear spring in. So what I'm going to attempt now is to just lift the axle so I can get past that spring and take the bolt out. So now that I've raised the axle, I should be able to take the bolt out. It's But for next time, when I put it back in, I'm just going to put it back in on that side. It would appear that I was wrong with my previous statement to put this in from this side, because this end here is thicker, the diameter is bigger than on the top, and in here it doesn't go through, so it must go in from that side. And here we have the track bar. And before I start taking out the old bushings, I'm just making sure that the new bushing, I got this new polyurethane bushings with the grease here. Just making sure that they actually fit, making sure that they are the same diameter. And also that the original bolt here is actually going to fit through this insert here, because it's slightly more narrow than the original one. No problem at all. I'm using a ball joint press to push the old bushings out. In order to facilitate that, I'm drilling holes in the rubber and cut off the outer lips. I'm greasing the mating surface with some silicone grease that was included in the package. These are polyurethane bushings, therefore quite a bit harder than the factory rubber items. For the track arm, I don't think that it has a lot of impact in terms of ride comfort, but I would advise that if you are not building your car for performance purposes, but keep it factory, to stick to the factory rubber items for comfort and to preserve the metal suspension components from extensive vibration. I couldn't find factory rubber replacements for the track arm, so I went with the polyurethane. Here we are, both new polyurethane bushings are in. Now it's ready to be reinstalled. Now that the track bar is back in with fresh polyurethane bushings, let's take a look at these control arms. In order to facilitate the disassembly process, I sprayed every bolt and nut with some penetrating oil the day before, and I'm glad I did, as it was still a tough one to free them up. The ball joint press does a great job here at bending the control arm. So in order to avoid having to warm it up and bend it back, just place a wrench socket between the arm wall to hold them in place and facilitate pushing out the old bushings. Go slowly and steadily and the bushing will pop out eventually. Out with the old, in with the new. I clean up the mating surfaces with some steel wool before inserting the new bushing. Placing the ball joint press in the correct position was a bit tricky and I always felt like I needed 4 hands to hold and put it all in the correct place in one go, but I eventually got the hang of it. I also made sure to measure the exact depth each bushing was pressed into and out of the opposite side of the control arm, so that the new ones would match the factory settings and align perfectly front and rear. If there's one thing I definitely advise, it's to finish and reinstall one side before removing the control arm of the other side. As you can see, the axle has already moved backwards just slightly at reinstallation. If I'd removed both control arms while the axle is only supported at the diff, it would have tipped over, possibly damaging the undercarriage or the linkage to the drive shaft. And then I did it all over again on the other side. So that's all for part 2. I know I initially said in part 1 that this was going to be a 2-video series, but as I went along filming and editing the entire material, I figured that this was going to be too long of an episode to just make it a 2-video series, so I decided to cut it in 2 and make the whole thing a 3-video series. So there's going to be a next video, a follow-up on this one, where I'm going to go through the final upgrades and modification to this car. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching and see you soon.